On the 23rd of June, UK will hold a referendum whether to stay in the European Union or whether to leave the European Union. But what will that decision mean for us, being Asian, being Punjabi, being Sikh, being British? Or you could be one of those people who are undecided at the moment. We've collected some of the experts on the Remain campaign and also on the Leave campaign, which may actually help you to make up your mind whether you want to stay in the European Union or whether you want to leave the European Union.
The European referendum on 23rd of June is a once-in-a-lifetime decision to be taken by UK voters, and for the Sikh community it's just as important as any other voters in the UK.
It's taken one or two generations for us to establish ourselves where we are.
I know from my own experience that the Sikh Punjabi community makes a massive contribution to British economy and society.
The Sikhs have had interaction with Europeans from the 1600s onwards. And in fact, some of the earliest eyewitness accounts of Sikh history were recorded by Europeans. Of the Sikh troops landing in Marseille on the 23rd of September 1914. And those reporters witnessed how the fate of Europe was changed by what they call the dusky warriors of the Orient landing on the shores of Europe, which directly impacted on our own parents. So when the Sikh regiments and other Sikh troops fought in both world wars, they were actually fighting a European war.
1974 was the last time we were asked to make a judgment on the European community.
From a Sikh perspective, what are the pros and cons of staying in Europe or to leave Europe?
The Sikh vote, even though Sikhs don't vote us en bloc, the number of Sikh voters in the UK can have a decisive impact on the end result.
As British Asians, our parents brought us from the subcontinent, so travel is part of our DNA.
The polls are very much showing a very even spread of views in the UK, and so voting by Sikhs will be just as important as any other group in the country.
So here are some of the experts that actually think you should stay in the European Union and why.
After 9/11, when we saw the tightening up of regulations for searching at airports, we saw that the star-wearing Sikhs were suddenly having to remove their star that was being searched. And in the UK, we lobbied quite hard on this, and the UK government recognised the importance of it. They discussed it with the EU counterparts within the European Commission, and they were given the authority to run a pilot project in the UK using alternative search techniques. That was successful, and then was rolled out to all EU countries, and that's been implemented. There's some places where that still needs a lot of work doing in terms of implementation, but in terms of the actual acceptance and the changing of legislation to suit the star-wearing Sikhs, it was a real success.
Now, if we weren't part of the European Union, I'm not going to lie and say things would never have changed, but the whole process would have been so much slower and less sensitive.
Well, I would pay tribute to the work of the Sikh Council UK in its dialogue with politicians, with government in this country and around Europe. I think it's really important that we have a constructive dialogue with the community. Government doesn't always get things right, and there's new laws and regulations quite a lot of the time, and I think the dialogue's been good, and I think the Sikh Council is respected for the work that it does.
So because in the UK we have such a strong Sikh community which can talk about Sikhi in a positive way, we were able to explain to our European partners about the entire concept of this and the whole issue about why it was so sensitive and so important.
If we leave Europe, we will now have to negotiate with all the 28 states, the 28 countries, and hopefully not only get them to understand what the star is, but actually how to handle. So for us, Sikhs, particularly with the star, travelling in Europe will be a problem. So Brexit, in other words, leaving Europe, will be a big problem for those who want to transport people between Europe and UK, and for those with the stars.
Sikh Punjabi community are about reaching out and working with others. We work with 27 other countries in Europe together for peace, for harmony, for prosperity.
The other success recently was the case of Paramjit Singh, who was arrested in Portugal.
So Paramjit Singh is a family man from Smethwick, West Midlands. So he's here with his wife and 4 kids, and he's been settled here for over a decade now. And he'd gone on his annual family holiday to Portugal around the end of December, and it was a routine family holiday that he's been taking for the last few years. And details emerged that he'd been arrested from the airport, and as details became more apparent, his name had been on some sort of Interpol list as he was some wanted criminal from Punjab, which again, highly questionable. So he was arrested, he was detained, and then within sort of 48 hours of that happening, the Sikh community all came together. So you had organisations like Sikh Council, Sikh Relief, United Sikhs, Smethwick Gurdwara here. There was a big meeting, and all Gurdwaras, all organisations came together on how best to handle the situation.
And the fact that we were part of the EU meant that we could lobby EU politicians, MEPs, etc., and that really helped in having him freed and returned to the UK.
As I can see that if we are not in a Europe, in my case, I could face the extradition back to India. So I strongly recommend to all to vote in the favor of the referendum, because my case is a very highlighted in Europe, because we were with the Europe. The England was with the Europe, and our MPs and our community was helping there. A great help being done by the Europe as well, by the other countries of Europe in my case.
If this whole case with Paramjit had happened, and if UK had chosen or was not part of the EU, there would be no MEP. There would not be a step in the process where we had MPs writing to their counterparts in Portugal expressing their concerns. That tie, that relationship exists because of the EU. And if we took this case and we take it fast forward 5 years, and there is no relationship with countries like Portugal or other European countries where a case like Paramjit Singh's could arise, it is worrying that that option would no longer be there, that relationship between UK and another European country through the EU is not there, where a dialogue could take place.
On behalf of my case, I can say this: if we were with the Europe, so we have done a lot, because we can exchange so many informations easily with the Europe. So if we are with the Europe, we are stronger.
Why would we turn our back on that, leave our friends and our colleagues on the rest of the continent and walk off into isolation? Doesn't make sense to us in the Labour Party, and I don't think it makes sense to the Sikh and Punjabi community, whose whole essence, which I admire, is about working together and crossing borders.
The Sikhs need to engage with the debate. The Sikhs need to be informed of the different issues so they can make an informed choice. But in doing so, I think I would really say that, regrettably, at the moment, the debate is very alarmist and is based on fear from both sides. Whether it's the exit side or the in side, a lot of the statistical information they're throwing is almost designed to create fear or alarm. And that can never be the right basis for taking a decision.
Staying in the European Union or actually leaving the European Union, because it's a single decision, we haven't actually got any figures or facts or what will happen and what won't happen. Here are some of the views of why you should leave the European Union.
Look, I think those Sikh organisations, and I respect the work that they do in the UK, they need to really look at the track record of the European Union's treatment of ethnic minorities. Let's have a look at that, because across the European Union now, you are having the rise of the far right. And whether you're Muslim or whether you're Sikh, etc., that racism that can be employed against Muslims, for example, is easily transferable against Sikh people, right? You have more French National Front MEPs in the European Parliament than you have Labour MEPs. The Austrian far right almost came within inches of winning the presidential elections. That's the first time since 1945 a Western European country has nearly had has a fascist president, right? The far right has risen in Holland, in France, in Denmark, in Germany, in Austria, in the Eastern European countries. This is a real problem.
Currently, being part of the European Union, it means that if they make a law which basically says we will ban all religious items or religious items on show within public places, which they've done in France and Belgium. They've started to implement that in Italy and in Switzerland. They're thinking about it in Germany. That will then come to Britain. Last week, a European Court of Justice lawyer actually says it should be law across the whole of the European Union countries.
Where I see this is going is that this could affect the hijab, the turban, the bag, and other religious entities that we wear. Qara, for example, and the cross is another example, because they want a neutrality work atmosphere.
I know friends and family over in France and Belgium who send their children to school right now without a dastar on their heads because they're not allowed to. Leaving the European Union actually makes it possible and makes it in our law that even if the ECJ makes that ruling where across the European Union states religious items are banned, it does not affect us in Britain.
In UK you have 600,000 Sikhs in a population of 65 million, and as a result we've gone comfortable, we're doing well, and we're an established community, etc. And sometimes it's very easy to walk in your comfort zone. And what we need to be careful of, you're going into a larger community, especially if you go into a federalised Europe, because you've got to look at it's not what it is now, you've got to look at what's it going to be in 20 years time, what's it going to be in 30 years time. You're going to be in a federalised Europe where you've got 600,000 people in a population of 742 million. So is your voice going to be just as strong? Are you going to be just an established community, or are you going to be an insignificant community where suddenly all your rights in terms of your qagars, all your rights in terms of your religious aspirations, etc., all become compromised, especially in a European Union which is far more right-wing and far more going against what it sees as an onslaught of Middle Eastern or other influences.
You got the wider point then of, actually, should we not be leading from the front, and should we not be saying, actually, we need to be part of the European Union to make sure that doesn't happen? Unfortunately, Britain gets outvoted 9 times out of 10 in any negotiation. The Euro and the Euro countries will always bulk together to outvote the UK. So what we need to do, and what's going to be even better for human rights, is to remove ourselves from that process and lead by example from Britain to make sure British law is supreme, so the ECJ and any European law cannot overrule that, to make sure we keep our Race Equalities Act, to keep our Anti-Discrimination Act in the workplaces and in schools, where people can go to school wearing a qara, wearing a dastar, wearing the hijab, wearing a cross, where people can take holidays like the SUKHI, Christmas is a Christian holiday, but like Eid and things like that, without any interference from anyone else saying, actually, we should be banning religious items and religious education.
And you're looking at situations where you've got in France and you've got in other places like that where Sikhs themselves are openly being discriminated against. So we need to be far more careful in our approach. I would like to see the Sikh community mirroring what is happening in Canada, where they're becoming far more established politically, not just economically, but far more ingrained in the social structures, and then being far more contributory to the actual national debate. I don't think Sikhs are going to be able to contribute to the national debate in a federal Europe of 742 million. I think it's far better for them to be in a smaller country which is young and dynamic and basically more nimble.
Once we've led and we've said, actually, this is how you should do it, we can influence. By leaving the European Union, it doesn't mean we stop influencing and we stop leading and we stop communicating. It actually means we lead from the front, but we actually show by example how to do that. So voting Leave on June the 23rd means that we can take control of our laws, we can make sure our Race Equalities Act and our Discrimination Act stays in place, and that it will never be overridden by anything the ECJ has said.
One of the most important issues in the referendum is the impact on business, economy and jobs. This affects every one of us and is a major issue for both the Leave and the Remain campaign. Let's hear from some of those in favour of staying in.
When the United Kingdom joined the European Union over 40 years ago, it was because of the economic logic of our trading patterns. And over the years that we've been members, that logic's become stronger, not weaker.
As a member of the EU, companies and people in the UK can sell their goods to consumers in the EU without the consumer having to pay for import taxes. In the same way, the companies who are exporting their goods, they don't have to pay export taxes in order to export those goods to the customer.
The European Union is home to over 40% of our exports. It's the source of half of the inward investment that comes into this country, which creates jobs, pays mortgages, puts food on the table for people.
The EU is our biggest trading partner, which accounts for at least 50% of our trade. If we left the EU, then we would still be able to trade, but we'd still have to abide by EU laws such as consumer protection laws.
And you've seen report after report from the International Monetary Fund, from the Treasury, from the Institute for Fiscal Studies, from the Bank of England itself, pointing to the risks and dangers of pulling out of the European Union for our economy, for that investment and for jobs.
We would have to start paying for importing goods, exporting goods, and this would ultimately lead to a rise in prices of items.
Eastern Foods imports from all over the world and exports to probably about 40 countries, mainly in Europe actually. So being in the European Union for us is a great advantage, as it is for many businesses in the country.
Our membership allows us to have a say in how trading rules are drawn up, and if we did leave the EU, we would lose our place and we wouldn't be able to contribute to this decision making.
Not only will importing become difficult, but we do supply to other industries. The automotive industry is one of them, and a lot of car factories are owned by European companies. If we opted out of the EU, these companies would shift their business and we would no longer be able to supply to them.
You're able to export very easily to all 28 member states without a problem, as if you were selling into, say, London or Manchester or Liverpool. And that, in fact, gives you the opportunity to grow your business quite rapidly.
It's the biggest economic zone in the world, and we can benefit from that. And in the UK today, we have the best of both worlds. We're members of the EU, but we're not members of the Euro, we're not members of the Schengen border zone, we're not going to be committed to ever closer union, but we can have access to the single market. And that's valuable for all companies and entrepreneurs in Britain.
Small companies depend on the state of the economy. So, if the argument is that by leaving Europe, we then increase our austerity, in other words, our recession by another 2 years, so we now suddenly go into a recession for 2 years, then every business, large and small, will be affected. The counter-argument of Brexit is, these are the people who want to leave, is actually this is big business talking, this is big business saying, we want to stay in Europe because we want to transport people in and out, and actually it's a great way of moving money around and avoiding tax. So those are the two issues, and really it's for you as viewers to make a point as to whether you think you want to see the bigger picture or the short-term pain of going out of Europe.
What are the arguments for leaving the European Union? What impact will it have on the economy and business?
The Bank of England, any big company are going to stay for Remain. Why? Because they get money out of it. It's easier for them to build a business across 37 different country states.
The European Union, in the way it's organised, is very open to the lobbying of big companies. The rules which are set suit the international big organisations. But the future and the economic growth and the future employment comes from small companies.
So if the United Kingdom votes to leave the European Union on the 23rd of June, we're not suddenly going to have no trade with the European Union. That's absolute nonsense. It's just a scare story.
Now, Germany, on the 23rd of June, and we come out of the EU, Germany would not stop exporting the cars to the UK. So the trade will go on. It's not going to be the end of the world.
Lord Bamford, who heads up JCB, one of the largest businesses in the United Kingdom, trades globally, employs 6,500 people. He, on Thursday or Friday last week, said, actually, we should be out of the European Union and we can hold our own. We can stand on our own 2 feet.
We have a large import to the UK of mangoes from India and Pakistan and Bangladesh. But however, there were some certain mangoes from India, the Alfonso mangoes, that are actually were infected by fleas. Now, the EU decided to outright ban on the mangoes without looking into detail what was actually the cause of the issue itself. And it was a very simple fix to actually bring them in line. EU is trying to do trades within itself, maximise those trades so that the EU bloc can actually rise.
There are 200 sovereign countries in the world. There are 28 members of the European Union. Many of those sovereign countries, including America, India, China, all trade with the European Union.
Yes, businesses are going to have to trade differently. Yes, businesses are going to have to start negotiating again. Hang on a minute, that's what a business should be doing. And if they want to take the easy way out, they're going to be voting Remain. But if they want to do what's right for the customer, for the consumer, for the public, they should back the Leave campaign.
And we know that something like 93% of trade in the United Kingdom is done by British companies trading with other British companies. And I think if we free them from some of the rules, become more outward looking, look to the rest of the world, rather than a European Union that is declining in growth, the more successful we're going to be.
So only 6% of our businesses actually trade with the European Union, right? That means 94% don't, but 100% of our businesses are subject to EU regulations and lawmaking.
EU law has supremacy, so it's more important and it's higher than our British national laws. If the ECJ, which is the European Court of Justice, rules something, we have to follow it by law. So leaving the European Union on June the 23rd means we can take back control of our laws, of our innovation in our businesses, of who can come to this country and where they can work, and we can have that fair process.
What's more to the point, if suddenly the European Union said on the 24th of June, oh, we don't want to trade with you anymore, who's going to lose out? It's going to be them, because we have a massive trade imbalance with the other 27 countries of the European Union of £65 billion a year.
Working in retail, I know that actually, when Aldi and Lidl joined the retail business, what did it do to a consumer basket? It drove down baskets. It means me and you going out doing our weekly shop is now cheaper than it was before Aldi and Lidl joined the UK market. So if we open up our business borders to across the world, if we vote leave on June the 23rd and we leave the European Union, what's going to happen is it's going to drive down basket prices, it's going to drive down consumer prices for ordinary individuals like me and you.
One of the issues in this referendum that affects all of us is the effect on employment. Both sides are campaigning hard to convince us that our jobs are safer with them. Let's hear how staying in the EU will protect our jobs.
I represent the West Midlands. The West Midlands exports to many of the European countries, and basically that helps to create income and wealth here for everybody as a result of that.
The free movement of people is most important, because in this region, in the West Midlands, we've got a huge engineering background, and there's a huge skills gap at the moment. It'll take 5 or 6 years before our own young lads and lasses get skilled and educated to do the engineering jobs. And to fill that at the moment with the likes of Jaguar Land Rover or engineering businesses in the Black Country, you need to have people from Europe to fill those jobs.
The vast majority of people who come here, whether it's from inside the EU or from elsewhere in the world, come to work hard, pay their taxes and make a positive contribution to this country.
Having access to the biggest single market, 500 million, that enables the companies who have their facilities here, that they can access the rest of the market, and that creates jobs.
NHS also suffers with a skills gap and a shortage of staff, nursing staff, medical staff, and by having the ability to bring in staff from Europe, they're able to fill the gaps that actually they don't exist in UK workforce. So it's most important that that is filled as well. In terms of doctors and surgeons, we have a very healthy situation whereby people go out into different countries of Europe. A lot of our doctors and surgeons and consultants are actually gaining experience from different countries in Europe.
The Leave campaign also has strong arguments on how leaving the EU will protect our jobs and employment rights.
Currently we have a skills shortage in this country. It's recognised in the national statistics, it's recognised by both the government and the opposition party, so that's not under dispute. But how do we solve that skills shortage? Actually, we need to open up the possibility where we can get the best entrepreneurs, the best businesses, the best minds into Britain to fill that spot.
If you are an employer, a large employer like I am, in terms of in healthcare, I'm looking at the calibre of the people that I'm employing. I don't really want to look at what is their colour of their passports. I want to look at is, do they have the skills? If you want your elderly person to be looked after properly in a care home, you want the best people there, the best skilled people to look after them.
I was on a programme a couple of weeks ago where they were talking about actually we can't get basically chefs to make dal roti and stuff in our Indian restaurants. We can't get Chinese individuals here to make Chinese food in the Chinese restaurants. Why not? Because it's easier to employ a European Union citizen because there's no visa process.
James Dyson, you know, the Dyson Hoovers and the Dyson Airblades, one of the most foremost engineers in this country, says he struggles to get the skilled workers because we are part of the European Union.
Tell me, why would we want to stay within the European Union, given that in the last 10 years the United States economy has grown by 6% and we have declined? The Eurozone is in decline. Youth unemployment in whole swathes of southern Mediterranean is going up. I think we will be much more successful if we take control and vote leave.
For our community and our generation to be able to then actually go out and say, but I want that best chef from India, or I want that best chef from China, or that best mind from Africa or Canada or America. We need to leave the European Union so we can have that fair process of allowing them to come here and work with us to broaden our minds, broaden our skills, challenge each other.
The deciding issue for many people in this referendum is immigration. This is the issue that generates the most headlines, creates the most fear, and is probably the most misunderstood. The Remain campaign has argued that immigration is a positive influence on the UK. Let's hear how that is.
A lot of people are looking at this whole referendum from an immigration point of view. A lot of people, when they think, should we opt in or out, don't look at it from the larger picture, but look at it from how many immigrants or people have actually come to the UK. Now that worries me slightly, especially when we think about people who leave the UK to live abroad. If I'm a GORA, white person, and I'm living in Spain, I'm referred to as an expat. Anybody else come to the UK is an immigrant.
It's sometimes unfortunate that this current debate on Europe is sometimes only seen through migration. All of history from time immemorial has been influenced by migration. Migration has fashioned North America and the USA. Migration has fashioned Australia. Migration has fashioned Europe, and it certainly has fashioned the United Kingdom.
My family came here, and I'm sure your family and many other people, we all came here because we wanted better prosperity, more opportunities for our children. We suffered a lot, you know, we made very many sacrifices, but now we're in a good position here. It is important to remember that we can't pull up the bridge, you know, and say that is it. We're fine, we don't care about anybody else.
It is correct to say that the Leave campaign are saying to some communities that the restrictions on bringing over their relatives or people coming in from India or Pakistan are down to EU law. The fact is, it's not true. This is national law.
Yes, we've got to have strong borders, we've got to have strong controls, but that's an immigration policy that we've got to have as a country, regardless of whether within the EU, outside the EU.
Because we need to care about everybody else, because they are suffering too, they have problems, and they want equal access to that opportunity and that prosperity.
If anyone in the Leave campaign is unhappy about British immigration law as it applies to people from outside the EU, it's not immigrants from elsewhere in the EU they should be blaming. It's not the EU they should be blaming. It's their own government, and it's up to our government to decide these laws, and our government can change them. I think it's a bit rich to attack the European Union for some of the restrictions that the government here has decided to place on immigration from India or Pakistan or elsewhere, and it's within our power to change it as long as we're lobbying the right target.
For the Conservatives, it's always been a policy to restrict immigration. That happened before we joined the European Union. If you have a long enough memory, you will see every Conservative government has restricted immigration from India and from Asia. So if you really want me to believe that suddenly these people who've been fighting initially on immigration, saying we want more people who look like you than we want people who look like us, please, you have to take that with a pinch of salt. And you know, if this government wants to allow people in from other countries, from the Commonwealth countries, and give them special status, it can. The European Union is not stopping them.
I think immigration clearly is an important issue, and more control of immigration is absolutely what the government should be working towards, and the government is, but I'm the first to admit that there's more to do. But when it comes to the EU and the question of immigration, what I would say to British Sikhs is that you can either choose to back David Cameron and trust him, or Nigel Farage.
To come out of the EU, we would have more control over our immigration policy. Now this is an important point, and as part of the debate is an important issue. But what we would say to Sikhs is that actually we need to examine this and probe this further, because by making the argument that coming out of the EU we can have more control over our own immigration policy, that is not necessarily equating to, or that's not necessarily the same as saying that actually immigration will increase from India, and people with family links in Punjab will have more, it will be easier for them to bring relatives over for visits, etc. So we need to ask this question to politicians so that they're not just making a superficial argument, but actually let's get under the argument and let's see what the impact really will be of voting in that way. And in that respect, if we as Sikhs were to ask these arguments, ask these questions, get involved in the debate in this detailed way, we can really make sure that the result is better in the long run.
The Leave campaign has campaigned heavily on the effects of immigration is having on the UK and our lives. Let's hear how leaving will affect that.
Immigration is good for this country. We need it in this country. It helps to make this country more diverse, makes it more innovative, and makes it more economically competitive on a global scale. However, being part of the European Union means we are part of an immigration system which discriminates against those people from outside the European Union. And actually, so if you're part of the European Union, you can walk into this country because of the colour of your passport, even if you don't speak the language, even if you don't understand the cultural heritage of this country. But yet, if you're from South Asia, if you're from India, from Pakistan, and you speak the language, and you're skilled, and you understand the culture, it is 10 times harder for people to come into this country. How have we got to a system where you get unskilled workers from Eastern Europe or from France or from Germany or wherever, just able to walk into this country, but we make it harder for engineers and doctors to come into this country, people and skilled workers that we need.
Even at the time of Tony Blair, he said in his speeches that India is creating more graduates than the whole of Europe put together. And so we have to look at, there is more skilled community coming out from that sub-nation than there is from the European Union.
My grandfather, my Dadaji, came here in 1963 from India, and it was all about having a better life for himself and his family. It was about having a fair day's work for a fair day's wage. It was about having that opportunity to basically make a home for himself, to own his own business, and then have better hopes and higher hopes for his children, and now my generation, his grandchildren. As a first generation who's gone to university, that opportunity wasn't available and wouldn't be available if we were still in India. So being from affluent backgrounds, the reason why voting leave is so important is so the next generation and other individuals from the Commonwealth countries, but even across the world, can come to Britain and have that same opportunity.
Some people are putting forward the argument that in terms of when Labour was in power, they allowed immigration from India, but when Conservatives were in power, they didn't. If you look historically, that is not true. The reality is people came in the 60s and 70s due to skill shortages, due to them being needed in NHS, being needed in factories, being needed in cotton mills, in various kind of industries at that time. It's not a Labour or a Conservative thing. What it is basically is we need to look at is where do we want the immigration in this country in the future to come from? Is it going to be based on purely what the colour of your passport is, or is it based on what skill you have?
When we vote leave, we will start a process which will take a number of years by which you put into effect that decision to have left. Anybody who lives in the United Kingdom now, or indeed any UK passport holder who lives on mainland Europe or has property, has rights protected under the Vienna Convention. What is now will remain as it is.
Somebody in the Sikh community, for example, wishes to invite a relative to come over for a family occasion. They have to go through hoops in order to get here. If an elderly person wishes to come and settle here and spend the twilight of their lives here, even with the family guaranteeing that there won't be any costs to the public purse, they still have to go through hoops. And I think that's just unfair.
Governments at the moment, what they've done is have really tightened up on that one bit which they can control. I think it'd be much fairer if we made a decision across the board, so that we would no longer unfairly discriminate against non-EU members, whilst we unfairly discriminate by giving disproportionate rights to other EU countries. So I think it would be a much fairer system because it would apply to all equally.
Now, the UK is a diverse society in which a range of cultural backgrounds feed into a vibrant and a creative artistic industry. Do artists and those who work in the creative industries have a view on remaining or leaving the European Union? Let's find out.
The creative industries are playing a substantial part when it comes to exporting intellectual property. So the creative industries largely operate on what we call managing creative talent. So it's how creatively you can sell something and how creatively you can put something together. So examples include advertising, include film production, include architecture, and the background I come from is music. So the argument is that if we leave Europe, not only are we losing a large proportion of our marketplace, but actually, in order to make your creative company work, you need creative talent. So if you draw up the drawbridge and say, actually, we don't want free movement of people, then what you are doing is you are restricting the talent that can come and work for you. You are now relying totally on UK talent. So firstly, you will lose movement of people. You may potentially lose movement of capital. What I mean by this, if you take the film industry, then you need to attract capital from all round in order to finance these things. So you may end up finding finance is more expensive. Why? Because we've now been told if we leave Europe, the economy will go down, inflation will go up, and confidence in the whole UK economy will go down, which makes it more difficult to access finance. So the argument follows that finance will become more expensive and difficult to get. Movement of talent will be a lot more difficult both ways. Thirdly, from a market perspective, most of the big clients, particularly automotive, so if you think of all the big car brands, BMW, Mercedes, Volkswagen, they're all in Europe. Now, they may then choose not to come to London, which is the creative talent for advertising, but may choose to go elsewhere. Those in America then, who want to use Britain to get into Europe, may also decide this is not the place to come to. In fact, we'll go to Europe direct. Now, the Brexiteers will argue, actually, that's all rubbish, because actually the success of creativity or the success of anything is based on your creative talent. So, I'll give you an example. Madonna, who's a performer, because she's brilliant, or Beyonce actually, the fact that she's from America hasn't stopped her exploiting her creative talents. But of course, for somebody who takes bands into Europe, I can tell you, you give a European a choice between hiring a EU band, where there's no paperwork involved, but having to generate paperwork to bring a Jarnac across, which is more expense, more time. I have a funny feeling I know what decision the EU promoter will make. But as I said, Brexiteers will tell you, any success the creative industries have had is nothing to do with paperwork, is nothing to do with barriers, it's all to do with, and that's what we're meant to be good at, it's all to do with creativity.
I feel like it's confusing a lot of people, such as myself, And I just feel like it's complicating things right now because, say for instance, I want to perform in either America or India or Canada, I'd have to apply for a visa and do a lot of paperwork. And I feel like I have a right to be able to be part of the European Union, and you know, it'd just be a lot of hassle to go through the whole visa thing just to perform in places like France. So I think for myself and for fellow artists, models, actors, singers, it would just make life easier for all of us.
If Britain does vote to leave the EU, I don't know where the arts industry will stand. I mean, the movement of our whole arts into Europe and how they're going to get there with visa regulation, work permits, it might be all difficult. We might be left on our own, and making it harder for us to actually learn other cultures and learn other music and perform in worldwide festivals.
As an artist, for example, I'm a British Asian. I can go to any place in Europe. I don't need a visa. It's so easy. Like, we had a shoot in Prague, I think about 4 months ago, and it was a last minute thing. And it was really helpful that I didn't need the visa, and we could just go there, and it's a lot easier.
Really important to be involved with the discussion when it comes to the EU referendum, whether we like it or not. Over the last couple of months, we've had arguments and discussions from both sides on whether or not we should be in or out in the EU.
So now that you've heard the experts on whether we should remain in the European Union or whether we should leave the European Union, hopefully it's given you a bit of an insight, and hopefully if you wasn't decided, that you can actually make your decision. But remember, whatever decision you make today can not only affect you, but also some of the generations to come. But one thing you must do is vote on the 23rd of June, whether you want to stay in the European Union or whether you want to leave the European Union. But the only way you can make a difference is by voting on the 23rd of June.